This is the grave of Silas Reed. Silas died at the age of 11 weeks. His cause of death is listed as lung fever. Now, along with not being a professional genealogist, I'm not a professional historian, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on anything I'm about to say, or really anything I say ever. So in the 19th century and before, fever was considered the sickness itself rather than a symptom or a manifestation of an illness. This is also why, for causes of death, a lot of times the cause of death is listed as a symptom, so what we would know now as a symptom. They didn't really have the diagnostic tools that we have now, or the medicines, so really they just focused on what was going on with the person just before they died. So because of that, the word fever found its way into a lot of disease names in these causes of death. So from my research, lung fever is most likely pneumonia. Pneumonia was a pretty common disease, a pretty common killer in the 19th century and long before. Nowadays, we have a lot more treatments for pneumonia, both viral and bacterial, but back then it was a pretty scary thing for parents of young kids. Silas had an older brother named Freddie. Freddie died almost exactly a year after Silas. He was 8 years old, and he died of typhoid fever, another very common cause of death from times before there were antiseptics and general knowledge of germ theory. These are some of my favorite graves to clean, the graves that are pretty much unreadable. It feels really good to give this person their name back and know that someone is mentioning their name even 150 some odd years after they have died. Silas and his brother are both buried under this really beautiful old tree that easily could have been there when they were buried, but it's not something that I'm really qualified to say. One thing about graves under trees is that they tend to degrade a lot faster because there's a lot more moisture, which promotes moss growth. So Silas and Freddie's graves will probably become grown over more quickly than if they were out in the open. And here it is post-rinsing. I've been really interested in history, genealogy, cemeteries as long as I can remember. It's been a lifelong fascination. There's a website called Find a Grave, which is basically what it sounds like. If you know you have an ancestor that's buried in a particular cemetery in another country or another state, you can request a photo of your ancestor's grave. And that request goes out to anybody who's identified themselves as a volunteer within a certain radius of where the cemetery is where the person's buried. So a woman in Iowa has lineage that traces back to Vermont, and she had seen her, I think it's her maybe great-grandmother's grave in a cemetery near me, and didn't have a picture of it, so she requested it through Find a Grave. When I found the grave, it was in pretty rough shape. It was covered in lichen, and it was pretty much unreadable. So when the woman saw my picture, she asked if I would be willing to clean it for her so that it was more readable. So after that, I kind of assembled my tools, got everything together, and I cleaned that stone. But basically it was just something that I found super therapeutic and really rewarding, so it's a thing I've continued.